it's that day of the year when they are very thankful, I believe, for the British who had caused a lot of bloodshed with the Native Americans and then created a romanticized history of how they all ate together and had a wonderful time.
You sure?
Am I being too cynical?
Are you sure it's the British in this case? Was it not
Well,
the Spanish?
Weren't those the Pilgrims?
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about Christopher Columbus here, aren't we?
In the States? I can't remember now. I'm sure it was the British.
Thanksgiving's about Christopher Columbus, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, frankly, I don't care either. All I know is
well, I think
I'm completely ignorant about exactly which historical event is being celebrated on the last Thursday in November.
But I wonder. I mean, I would imagine that people who have considered the matter are as horrified by what Thanksgiving has become as people in other countries are by what Christmas appears to have become. And effectively, it has absolutely nothing to do with what it's supposed to. I think in the United Kingdom, I mean, we reached peak irony several decades ago. But yes, it does seem to just get worse and worse and worse every year. I don't mean to deliberately steer the conversation onto Christmas when we're still in November. But the commercialization of absolutely everything, it's more rampant. I mean, if it can be believed, it is more rampant now than ever before. It is. I still find it like a slap in the face. I really do. I mean, whether it's people trying to flog Christmas stuff in August, or the fact that the vast majority of people can go through the entire period believing that they're completely entitled to celebrate the holiday of Christmas and calling it Christmas and apparently celebrating Christmas without any regard at all for why that's come about. I find that peculiar, to say the least.
I'm not quite so pessimistic about the commercial aspect of it, because I think the fact that we are being bombarded with Christmas messaging from about September or August is demonstration of that people are rejecting that. And whether that's because they've had enough or whether it's because they can't afford it, we could have a conversation about that. But, certainly in the last 20 years, I think people are becoming very jaded with the, how many more stupid knickknacks can be given to each other at Christmas time. It's nobody that I'm sort of associated with particularly wants useless Christmas presents every year. And, for us, if setting aside whatever belief we might have, it's the getting together, the family, the sort of just the social aspect of it, which is vastly more important than any kind of commercial consideration.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, so you're saying you think the marketing of stuff has been extended because people have become more resistant to it? Is that what you mean? Because
nobody's playing, and if you think back, Charles, 30 years or so, what did we have? We had maybe a New Year's Day sale. Now the sales are constant.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that anything can be sold at the moment is to vastly cut back on it. Cut the costs. So, or at least that made okay. Increasingly, that is a marketing ploy. You produce something for nothing in a low wage economy. You pretend that it costs £200 and then you take 75% off. That's often a marketing ploy, but nonetheless, the idea of when I was a teenager, whatever, it was the sort of New Year sales was a sort of presented as being something that was that only happened once a year. It was a special event. You get your great deals now, whereas now it's just constant from about August.
No, it's true. It is. It absolutely is.
And by the time we get to the 15th of December, they'll be starting to have Easter eggs on the shelves again. It's ridiculous.
It is.
But does the message get lost in all of that? I mean, people
Which
say
message,
that.
Jerm?
Well, yeah, this is it. This is what I mean. I mean, what is it? What does it become? And how does that relate to Thanksgiving, or indeed any of the other festivals that are celebrated anywhere else around the world? Are any of them still sort of true to what they were supposed to be, what they were supposed to celebrate, without an ever creeping sort of encroachment by commercialisation? I mean, maybe some are. I don't know. But I would have said all of the Western ones have been completely subverted for, not just for commercial gain, but also the absolute warping of people's minds as to what anything does or doesn't mean. I always find it interesting, actually, looking at the government departments, the British government departments, because everything now obviously comes out via Twitter or X. So if you haven't put it on X, it doesn't exist. And the British government departments trip over themselves to celebrate all the religious festivals that are not Christian, and they apparently very grudgingly will put out one miserable Easter or Christmas message. But I have actually kept sort of record of, I mean, the Home Office is particularly interesting. Any of the Islamic or Jewish festivals, they're really, really ornate graphics with lots of text and how delighted they are that people should be celebrating this. But with Easter, it just says something like "Happy Easter," and it's just a really, really boring picture of an egg, but presumably a chocolate egg, and that's it. It's quite illustrative. But I think the whole thing has been well. I mean, the idea of celebrating, and indeed the way that we do celebrate, because again, that has been sort of perverted, exactly like Mike says. If we're to think about the meaning of anything, then it's to do with the people rather than, as it's become, certainly in the West, to do with the indulgence. It's to do with responding to that marketing. So it doesn't matter whether you're giving plastic tat from wherever that's going to be in the bin within a couple of days, or whether you're eating or drinking yourself silly. But that is what has crept in, as though that is the correct way to acknowledge a significant moment in one's history or indeed religious calendar. It's completely extraordinary. It's absolutely, I would say in almost all instances, totally contrary to what it should be about.
Nassim Taleb, whose books I've read, or at least some of them, and I have found them particularly insightful. And paradoxically, he got the whole COVID thing, utterly wrong. But nonetheless, he talks about is it the dictatorship or the tyranny of the minority?
Yes, I mean, I think that that is part of what I'm saying with the way in which non-Christian, sort of non-traditionally British things are dealt with. But I think that that affects itself in every area of life now. Look at the things that constitute sort of responsible behaviour by corporations, or at least so they would have you believe. It is absolutely still, even though it's become a sort of mainstream topic, it is still a minority concern that so-and-so or such and such an activity produces carbon dioxide. I mean, that there are really very few people in the world who get up every day and think, oh my goodness, all this carbon dioxide, what are we going to do about it? But people will still be prepared to go along with the narrative, because the way it's dressed up and it's made to sound like, you're a good person if you go along with this one. And it's become the same with absolutely very much minority things, whether they pertain to all the classic things like race, identity, gender, all of those things. But absolutely, it's a perfect tool if you galvanise and create a sort of a shrill minority who is prepared to act in a fashion that can, sort of stimulate the genesis of a movement around it, and then you can try to chuck that one over the majority. The effects are astonishing. I mean, all these things we talk about, that's essentially sort of how it happens, really.
He actually goes on to talk about the sort of asymmetrical nature of how the minority, let's say even if it's 3 or 5% of people who, let's say, are halal, right? And they are unwilling to compromise. The majority, for some or other reason, feel that they need to completely accommodate for halal food, and therefore every McDonald's or every food outlet or whatever, everything must now accommodate. It's a very strange phenomenon.
I just need to stop you there. Sorry, did you just say the word McDonald's and food outlet in the same sentence? This is not acceptable.
But you get the point that I'm making, that there's this weird type of intolerance from a sheer minority. Let's just say transgender. Now, I don't believe that men can be women and women can be men, right? And I think the percentage of quote unquote transgender people is less than 1% or something like that in any kind of Western society. Why then must a third bathroom be built in public places?
Well, that's a very good question. And actually that goes back to appealing to people's better nature and the corruption of this whole idea of what sort of being a good person is about. Because actually, to go back, I would hope not, but I think there might be a few people who take issue with this. Actually, the precursor to that was loos that are designed for people who have disabilities, which have become, of course, totally erroneously referred to as disabled loos, because, of course, the loo itself is not disabled. That would be tedious and problematic for everybody. But the point is that if you are not disabled, but you use a loo that is fitted out for disabled people, that somehow you are doing something wrong. And that is not at all the point. The point is that those are designed so that they can be accessed by people who are disabled. But obviously, there are a very small minority of people who do require the use of that loo. So it's not like you're depriving anybody else from doing it. Obviously, if you deliberately run ahead of somebody who is disabled and you occupy that space when they are supposed to be able to use it, yes, okay, that's a totally different thing. And I know it sounds incredibly mundane, but it is really interesting because it absolutely does give an insight into the way in which people can be nudged via being made to think that their actions have a consequence on people in situations when, frankly, it absolutely doesn't. I mean, if you go into a loo like that, it makes absolutely no difference unless there is somebody who cannot access another loo actually trying to get into it at the same time as you. And that is, it's with that start point that the idea of, a third loo, or indeed making people share all the same things, that's sort of how you get there. And at no point have people challenged these utterly mundane and apparently banal sort of changes, and yet they are changes, and they're changes in the way that we are sort of being made to look at stuff. It's exactly the same with the carbon dioxide. We were talking about on the Wednesday news extra this week. Mike and Vanessa and I were talking about the absolute absurdity of a war organisation, so in the United Kingdom, the Ministry of Defence, saying that it's got it's monitoring its carbon footprint and it's trying to do X, Y and Z green stuff, and it's doing biofuel in armoured vehicles stuff. Yeah, fine, all very well, until one piece of ordnance goes off, and then the amount of not just carbon dioxide but all sorts of other things that are released utterly blows up that message as well. And yet these are the sorts of things that we are inclined, or have been made to be inclined, to go along with. It's complete nonsense.
But the question that I think we all should be thinking about is, because Charles is absolutely right in what he's just said, but who's providing the nudges? Is it the individual trans person or disabled person or whatever minority person, whichever minority it is, or is it campaign groups? And if somebody is campaigning for a particular topic or a particular character trait, whatever it happens to be, at what point does that campaign become something which has been effectively taken over by somebody with a bigger idea in mind? But actually, Jerm, the question in terms of toilets, if we're talking toilets here, is is whether the third toilet is actually being built, or whether we're just simply taking the signs off the doors of all the toilets and saying just everybody use whatever you like. That's also something else is going on.
I must say, it is a very, very effective way of making everyone feel deeply uncomfortable. I remember that from, classic, of course. Why wouldn't it be? When I was undergoing training in the police, one of the buildings, one of the police, wasn't a headquarters building, it was a sort of training facility that had been put up at great expense, had exactly that. All the in fact, no, not all, but almost all the loos in that building were for everybody, and it just everyone looked so sheepish going in and out of those doors because there were men and women in the same space, and no one quite knew where to put themselves. And it was one of those places where the cubicle doors didn't go all the way to the ceiling or all the way to the floor. It was just terribly, terribly awkward. And also, there was absolutely nobody in that environment who was supposed to benefit from it, in that there were no women pretending to be men and no men pretending to be women, and yet we all had to play along with it, precisely as you say, Mike, because the sign, basically just the signs had been changed on the doors. It was dreadful.
Carl, and his great shows that he's now doing for UK columns. So I just want to premise that by saying I traveled to China with him, and he is a smart guy. He's very balanced, and he's got a phenomenal insight into Chinese history, and I think that's extremely valuable. What upsets me a little bit is the typical binary trope that, because he's now not saying only bad things about China, he's UK columnist now pro-China.
I am pro-China in the sense that China itself has done nothing to hurt me. I believe that China is a country like any other that deserves its own ability to make its own decisions about its own destiny. And I believe that China should not be on the receiving end of a bunch of rhetoric from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe, which is intended to create division, conflict, and so on. And that doesn't mean that China gets off the hook with any of the things that it does. If it is, as I believe it is, digging up huge quantities of Central African countries in order to obtain cobalt, and it's using child labour in order to do that, then that absolutely they need to be held to account for that. But that doesn't mean that we have a blanket anti-China rhetoric that is basically the rhetoric of the British government and the United States government.
Well then, sorry, Charles, Mike. Well then, before you go any further, sorry, but let's just then, for the sake of clarity, define what we mean by pro-China and anti-China, because we're talking about a big country with a lot of people.
Well, precisely, and the problem that I have with much of the conversation about China, and the reason that I was so keen to have Carl presenting what he's presenting, is because there's this. We're talking about a country of over 1 billion people, and how can the suggestion that this is just one homogenous thing is just completely ridiculous, and the suggestion that the Chinese Communist Party is in total control of everything that goes on in that country is ridiculous as well. I mean, China has all the same problems that we have in the West. They have corruption. They work very hard. I mean, as far as I can see, they seem to work very hard to try to deal with the corruption that is there. They have, but one of the reasons that I went there last April was to see for myself, as far as you can. We've said this before, but as far as you can from a sort of tourist trip, to see for myself what it's like there, and there were things that I liked a lot about it. There were things that I could be critical about, as there are with the activities of the Chinese state. But the problem is, Jerm, that we are absolutely 100% in an information war at the moment. That on one side we have an establishment in the West, which I believe is led by, at least the narratives are led by Britain in many ways, which is 100% anti-China in the sense that everything that China is, they are projecting onto China their own mindset in terms of their imperialist thinking and their expansionist thinking and their we must rule the world thinking. Now, the same goes for Russia as well. We have this absolute narrative as well. And the problem becomes then one of, if you say that the British government is doing this, that they are pursuing a war policy against these two countries, then of course you're going to see the people coming out of the woodwork and saying, oh, well, you're just an apologist, or you're just pro that country. And of course, I've made a qualified comment about that a second ago. But the other common thing that I'm noticing here, Jerm, which is quite interesting, is that the people that are attacking Carl and attacking us for having Carl on the program are pro-Zionist as well, and this is a very interesting dynamic because of course the other thing that we're doing at the moment is absolute criticism of Israel and Israel's activities in Gaza, and so. It does not surprise me that we're starting to see some voices suggesting that we have an agenda with respect to China. It's not the case. If you look at what Vanessa's doing with respect to Russia and China at the moment, she's being extremely, extremely critical about their role in the Middle East and other places. So, it's not correct to say that we are just blindly pro any country. Every country that deserves criticism should receive the criticism for the things that they do wrong. They should absolutely be applauded for the things that they do right. But we've also got to remember that we are in this information war environment where there's an establishment-driven desire to demonize certain countries around the world, and we've got to absolutely call our own governments out for doing that. I mean, because if all they have is the personal attack, you're a shill, they have nothing, right? If what we're saying is wrong at any point, then come back to me and tell me why it's wrong, and we can have a discussion about it. If you're just going to say, oh, you're just a Russian mouthpiece, or you're just a Chinese mouthpiece, or you're a shill for this, or you're a shill for that, then go away, because I'm not interested in having a conversation with you. You don't have anything to bring to the table. Bring your criticism that shows that what we've said about a particular situation is wrong. And then we learn, you learn, everybody wins, but who cares? Let them. But the other reason that I was enthusiastic about Carl doing what he's doing is that, there's a lot of information floating around about Belt and Road, for example, and activities in Africa and activities in South America and all kinds of activities around the world. I'm actually hoping that as this series develops, we start to hear from people that are on the ground in these countries on the receiving end of these activities, and just to get some kind of perspective on what China is actually doing or what Russia is actually doing, because the Sahel region of Africa, for example, is clearly heavily contested. The European Union, Britain, view that as being their southern neighborhood, but Russia and China have massive influence there. I want to understand that situation a lot better, and you can't understand it just by listening to what the British government says. You can't understand anything by listening to what the British government says. You got to expand your horizons a little bit, and hopefully that's what we're doing. But if people want to just to hurl abuse, let them.
Well, I think we consider separating the wheat from the chaff. I would say that anybody who begins an argument with the idea that somebody or something, an organisation, can be pro-China is about as fat-headed a thing as I have ever heard in my life, and that's to put it mildly. As we've talked about before on many occasions, not least after you came back, Jerm, and as you've both just said, China is an absolutely enormous country. So when we say pro-China or anti-China, what on earth are we actually talking about? Are we talking about the over 1 billion people that live there, or are we talking about the state architecture that is supposedly running the country? And even if it's the latter, are we talking about all of those people who are concerned with state business and making decisions that might affect children in Democratic Republic of Congo or wherever else, not forgetting that every single other nation that we are likely to discuss on this banter session has probably done the same, if not worse, in years gone by. So I think we have to be very careful to judge by consistent standards. But frankly, why are people not just taking situations on their own merits? I mean, it's perfectly extraordinary that in the same sense, I mean, let's take, well, we've spoken about Russia, Iran, and why on earth, if people believe the sort of terror and nuclear narrative about Iran, why should that make them think differently about the Iranian people, in the same way that if we start to then look back at our own countries? Now, I think that most of what the British government does is irresponsible and morally wrong, but that doesn't make me anti-Britain. It makes me disappointed, frustrated, and all the rest of it, that the British people are being put in a position where their government is carrying out activities that really are not being done in their name, certainly not in my name. So I think there's a huge amount of nuance to it, particularly with China. I mean, I think people who are sort of putting this front and centre are just falling into a very dull and yet gigantic binary trap of considering that you should really be. I mean, what's the inference? If you're criticising somebody for being pro-China, well, what do you want them to be? Anti-China? Or do you want them to look at what the Chinese administration is doing in relation to X, Y, or Z, and then judge each point on its own merits? Because, I've just made damning comments about the British administration, but if I thought long and hard enough about it, I would be able to come up with some initiative or initiatives or things that I do like about the way in which society runs in this country. But just to take a blanket position on whether one is pro or anti-China, and indeed what that's supposed to mean if you do, either as an individual or sort of apparently as an organisation, because you talk about something that seems to be not universally damning. I cannot see the point. It's just, to me, it's a sort of, it's a navel-gazing exercise in the extreme.
But in any event, when people say pro-China, I think for the most part they're referring to the government, or like you said earlier, the state architecture, Charles. I don't think they're referring to the people.
I don't know. I'm not sure that I necessarily go along with you there, because let's say we talk about the policy on infrastructure and resources in other countries, particularly Africa. That's not the government that are doing that. So, and yet people are absolutely judging all of those, the Chinese people who are on the ground and what the Chinese are doing there and this, that, and the other, without considering what it is that especially British and American corporations are doing at exactly the same time. So I think people are very inconsistent, and I'm afraid to say I do think that this does carry well beyond a critique of the Chinese state. I mean, obviously, I could be wrong, and that's going to vary by individual. But I think it's I think people are sort of lazy enough to not spend the time delineating as they should.
It's really interesting. China has Carl said it in one of his reports recently from China when he was over there. He doesn't care what China's doing because China has no jurisdiction over his life. And I think that whenever we look at what other countries are doing, this is pure diversion in a sense, because whatever they're doing, that's for them and for their people to decide what kind of society they want to live in. Now, they've chosen, for example, because this is one of the things I did ask while I was there, they've chosen to go fully digital in terms of payments and so on. Now, that doesn't mean you can't pay cash for stuff. Before we went, we were told, it could be problematic to pay cash because people will always accept cash, but they may not have the correct change to give you if you're buying something and so on, because they don't hold cash. We didn't find that in any of the places that we went. And okay, we weren't outside any major cities, but still that was the situation. Cash was no problem. But for example, one of the reasons that they would say that they are happy to use digital transfers is that it has just completely obliterated street crime, because people don't carry cash, and so there's no point in sort of mugging people for their wallets because there's nothing there. so that is one of the benefits that they perceive. But the other point I would make about this is that it is simply wrong for us, and it's totally arrogant for us as Westerners to look at what goes on in countries in the East and try and say that we understand the way that they think or how they want to organize themselves or any of that. I don't think it's possible for us to understand it. I think if you go and live there for 50 years, I still think you probably don't really understand the mentality there. But as well as that, in the whole China, particularly in China, with the China issue, the way people think about this is internally inconsistent, shall we say, because you'll hear people talking about, there's no such thing as viruses, or COVID was fake, but it came from a lab in China. And the same person will say this, take these two positions at slightly different times, and somehow they think that these two positions are consistent, and they're not. So, what that demonstrates to me, or what it seems to demonstrate, is that people are susceptible to certain propaganda, and one of the bits of propaganda that they are susceptible to is the whole China virus thing, and that China did this as some kind of attack on the rest of the world. I think we've got to if we're going to try to understand what's going on around us, we've got to first of all try to understand what our government is doing, but we've also got to try to understand as best we can the target of a lot of the propaganda that we're being subjected to at the moment. And
someone said to me the other day, yeah, but the Chinese they're colonizing your continent, Africa. And my response was, yes, sure, okay, but at least
but hold on a second, are they? Because this is part of the. Now, I don't have it. I'm not saying that they aren't at this point in time. It's certainly something that I want to understand a lot better. But is that not projection again? Is that not us in the West looking at what our countries did in the past in terms of colonization of countries in Africa, and then projecting that onto what China's doing? Because for example, one of the things that the West did, as everybody will be aware, was to absolutely tie African countries up in such a pile of debt that they effectively, it kept these countries subjugated. What I'm saying is that China's not doing that at all, and in fact, in many cases, China's forgiving debt that the West would never forgive.
But that's the point, Mike. That's why I'm jumping in. But that is the point that I was making. So someone said to me, yeah, but they're colonizing Africa. And I said, okay, but what do you mean? Well, they're building infrastructure. So I said, okay, you're saying that like it's a bad thing. I mean, I'm quite happy to have high-speed rail and an airport in Ethiopia that is now one of the best airports on the continent, particularly for international travel. And that was built by, Chinese companies. Thank goodness that somebody is trying to speed up some of the infrastructural developments that have been wrecked over the last few decades by Western interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think in all of these respects, people are falling for various narratives that's, first of all, conditioning them to think in a way that I would say is disconnected and incoherent. But again, like we talked about before, it's a great big distraction. I mean, going back to where you started with this, which is that people are having a pop at Carl, let's say. I mean, why? What, who does that benefit? Seriously, what is the result of that? If you've got a specific challenge to make with something that he has said on a factual basis, okay, that's a different matter, and that should be the basis upon which all of this is judged. Whether it's Carl or anything that goes out on UK column, and this is what Mike and Brian have said for absolutely years, which is, don't trust us. Go and look for yourself. I mean, we present in such a way that we hope makes sense to the audience, but that's after having researched it's sufficiently to be able to present that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking what might be described as a position on something to be pro or anti. It is dealt with in an objective manner, and I think this is unfortunately what I'm seeing specifically with the Chinese issue, and indeed the conflation of whether or not China, the state, the administration is up to no good, and conflating that with whether or not people who are operating within our sort of media space are then to be judged good or ill. It is, it is ridiculous, but it is also a great big distraction. Why are people getting so wound up? Like Carl says, I mean, really, what are the Chinese administration doing that is affecting us directly? I don't think very much, and especially not when we consider what our own administrations, particularly in the United Kingdom, what is being pushed here is coming from here. It is not coming from China. If anything, it's coming from, I think we've got much more to be concerned about with what's going on in Europe, in Israel particularly, and in the United States. I mean, therein lie many, many more dangers, I would say. So why are people getting their knickers in a twist over what somebody like Carl, who is very well informed, challenging him on specific points, fine, but to sort of start besmirching people and organisations on the basis of this, this sort of proxy argument about China is a just complete waste of time.
And the other thing I would say, Jerm, is I'm encouraging you not to get upset by any of this, but the thing that really does yank my chain is the sheer hypocrisy of it.
Yes.
Right? Because every single person who's criticising China probably has 50 products on their person at that moment in time that were manufactured in China, right? We were happy as a society to take advantage of cheap labour manufacturing in China for decades. And now that China's effectively taken over the world in terms of productivity and production, then it becomes a problem. It was a systematic policy decision to export and offshore our production from the West into those countries. And yet we're not criticising the people that made that policy decision. We're now criticising China. And this really does yank my chain because it demonstrates exactly why we are in the mess we're in, because it's totally wrong-headed thinking. If you think China's bad, stop buying products that are manufactured in China, right? But you won't do it because you want your iPhone and you want your gaming platform and you want your other entertainment, right? So if you're not gonna take a stand on, if you think China's bad and you're not going to take a stand on China, then go away and bother somebody else would be my response to that.
People who are wanting to heap criticism on Carl or anybody who sort of can be described as saying stuff about China that's not universally damning, of course, are putting themselves in exactly the same position as the security and intelligence services, which I find hilarious. So again, on the sort of inconsistency, either you do sort of mean it about exactly like Mike says, all the parts in your iPhone or whatever other benefits you're directly receiving from China, or indeed, on the sort of the mistrust of the state, the deep state in the United Kingdom, although it looks like you're completely aligned with their point of view. So it is a strange ideological position to occupy, I think, in that respect as well. But that again doesn't necessarily seem to be considered to be a factor, which I'm afraid to say I do find rather amusing.
Sorry, Charles, you have to remind me. Which is the select committee? The intelligence. What do you remember the formal title of it? The intelligence select committee.
I think isn't it the Intelligence and Security Select Committee? Could be.
They good place to go and decide and look to see what which policies or agendas might be at work here, is to go there, because they have published their China report, they've published their Russia report, and so on. So we are witnessing, we're living through a process in the West where the West has clearly looked at Ukraine and said, well, this is a great business model, or even Gaza for that matter, and so we are now in the process of total militarization of our countries, and we're clearly going to base our whole economy on the production of products which are designed for one purpose only, which is to kill other people. And we're going to use Russia and China as the battering rams over the heads of people to accept this policy shift. And then we're going to provide people with jobs in the defense sector, and which, of course, defense in this context means war sector. And so they're going to manufacture consent by making people reliant on the income that they receive from this type of activity. And it just fascinates me that clearly, we're going to kick off all these proxy conflicts around the world is probably the outcome, while maintaining this narrative that we need to prepare for a long industrial scale war with one of these big superpowers. There's no way, as we were sort of more than hinting at on Wednesday's news program, on Wednesday's Extra, the idea of actually running a long industrial scale war with Russia or China, certainly for the foreseeable future, is totally pie in the sky, because we don't have the capability to do it. But we're going to strongly put this idea in people's minds. We're going to convince them that they've got to be afraid of these countries, that these countries are sole purpose is to blow us up in our beds, and therefore we've got to. But in the meantime, we're going to maintain the tension by making sure more and more people die in Ukraine, more and more people die in the Middle East, and maybe we think about Georgia or Moldova or some of these other hot, or Taiwan perhaps, some of these other hot places that can be kicked off around the world. This is a really dark and cynical policy agenda. It's a really dark and cynical way to run an economy. And if we are pro-China for calling that out, then fine. I'm happy to be pro-China in that context. But I would be very sad if at the end of the day the British people or the French or the German or the United States people accept that future for themselves, because it's not a good place to be going.
Where should we be going then, Mike?
We should remember our history, right? Because and I just going to mention this, and if this makes me pro-China, then I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to accept that. But a lot of years ago, I can't remember when it was, 2016, 2017. Xi Jinping said something, but before I get to what he said, I just want to remind everybody, because we live in and nation states which were basically established after the Peace of Westphalia. So we had a big war in Europe, and lots of people died, and eventually there was a peace came about and a treaty was signed. And the first clause of that treaty says that there shall be a Christian and universal peace and a perpetual true and sincere amity, that this peace and amity be observed and cultivated with such a sincerity and zeal, and this is the key part, that each party shall endeavour to procure the benefit, honour and advantage of the other, that thus on all sides they may see this peace and friendship. Right? This is a completely different position to take. This was the basis of the modern Western nation state, and the idea of it is not peace through strength, which is what we're being told at the moment, that we've got to be prepared to be able to be in a position to win a war with Russia or China. We've got to be prepared to be in a position to defeat them utterly. What the Peace of Westphalia represents is a completely different relationship with international, a completely different situation with international relations. Now, several years ago, Xi Jinping said, history tells us the law of the jungle isn't the way of human coexistence. Every nation should obey the principle of equality, mutual trust, learning from each other, cooperating and seeking joint benefits for the construction of a harmonious world, sustained peace and a joint prosperity. And it seemed to me at the time that was absolutely, he was clearly using the language of the Treaty of Westphalia. He was saying to people, come on, drop the nonsense of militarization and cooperate and build a world which is the kind of world that we all want to live in. And so, if that statement and has been utterly rejected by the West, and I think that's really a real shame in many ways. Now, if taking that position makes me pro Xi Jinping or pro-China, if that's how you think about what I've just said, then fine. But I would suggest maybe there's a bit of deeper thinking required in our entire approach to how we're doing international relations at the moment, and whether we should be actually dropping this whole concept of geopolitics in the first place.
Straight away we are into the territory of suggesting that one item can be said to speak for all behaviours, and it can't. So that that has been said. Therefore, it's up to the remainder of the Chinese administration, and indeed the actions that Xi Jinping is able to influence, to be consistent to what he's said. Now, is that happening? I don't know. Probably not quite. I mean, there are so many examples of this. One, interestingly, there's a minister in the Labour government at the minute called Al Khan, who was a Royal Marine for 24 years, left, became an MP, and is now in government. And he, because he was in the Royal Marines, he's being put forward as the bloke to sort of sell the change in legislation about Northern Ireland, which we won't get into now because it's very complicated, but effectively making a very, very unfair situation in that British servicemen may be tried, whereas anybody who was described previously sort of as a terrorist cannot. But never mind. The point is that Carnes is being hammered, I would say quite rightly, for trying to sort of have it both ways, put himself forward, sell himself as being a veteran looking after the blokes, this, that and the other, at the same time as hanging out anybody who stands to be pursued by legacy troubles investigations to dry. And he's been sort of nailed for this, and he's trying to squirm out of it by sort of saying, well, it's better to be on the inside where you can influence things and this, that and the other. But actually what has happened is that he has been exposed for being incredibly inconsistent. So he might be saying some of the right things about veterans or about this, that and the other, but he is being undone by one other thing. And I think that's a good sort of example of the way in which we should consider things, because it is all to do with consistency. probably too late in the conversation to get into this exactly, but are we really going to say that one people, one state, one organisation is always going to do absolutely the wrong thing all the time, or absolutely the right thing all the time? I think that would be a hard position to hold. But yeah.
No, I completely agree with that, Charles. That's of course. I would absolutely say that, as I said earlier in the program, China is not entirely, Russia is not entirely consistent with that.
Exactly.
Russia, for example, has been complaining about the rules-based order being the rules of the West, and that the rules change all the time, and all these kinds of things. And Russia has not been entirely consistent in upholding international law and so on. And that, of course, in a sense, undermines their position. Same with China. But if we're talking purely principles, then I think what that statement represented was quite a good way to look at the world. And then we can have a conversation about the specifics of it. But once we've established that that's actually a principle that we might want to run international relations by, and abandon this geopolitical, we got to beat the other guy over the head with even bigger bombs than they have, rubbish, because that way just leads to disaster. Yeah. Then we can have, if we make that principled decision, then we can have a conversation about the specifics. That would be my response to that.
I totally agree, absolutely, and then it is up to them to cleave to those principles, and that therein lies the sort of interesting scrutiny and analysis. I think One thing I was just going to say on the sort of never-ending war, and just a statistic that I find in terms of sort of what can we do, that it just is interesting. Actually, I haven't checked from yesterday's budget what the figure is, but it will be slightly lower. The defence budget, so the figure that is put forward by the British government for war in order to be able to, do whatever it is, go into a protracted war with Russia or whoever else, is a little over £60 billion in the year, and that is slightly less than the turnover of the United Kingdom's largest supermarket, Tesco. I just find that quite an extraordinary statistic. Tesco, last accounts, it turned over £68 billion, and that's that is a story in itself, because the power that organisation holds in terms of the ability to sort of lead the British public a merry dance in terms of nutrition and this idea of sort of fake food and everything else. But still, they are recouping more than the entirety of the war budget on an annual basis. I think it's quite something.
All right, guys, it's time to go. Look at the time. I'm going to go and test drive a Chinese car.
As long as it's not electric, that's fine.
No, it won't be electric. All right, catch up with you gents next week.